Kerala has always been rich in traditional crafts. The villages were the workplaces for these crafts. Bare hands and simple tools shaped things of daily use. The raw material did not come from outside. It was available in plenty in and around the villages. The products had a steady demand in the local market. These traditional crafts were a part of the age-old self-sustaining lifestyle of rural societies. But times have changed. This is the local market at Kudirapandi in Tarawa Panchayat in the Kollam district of Kerala. Not long ago, it was a thriving trade center for the locally hand-woven screw pine bed mats, popularly known as Tarawa mats. But today, this industry is a pale shadow of its past. Only a few women involved in the craft bring in their half-finished mats to be sold to the middlemen. The meager sums they earn is barely enough to meet their domestic needs. The half-finished mats return to the market as finished Tarawa bed mats every Monday and Thursday mornings. Only about a decade ago, there were over 3,000 people involved in the making of Tarawa bed mats. Though the numbers have dwindled, making mats from screw pine leaves is still a major occupation for many in the area. The craftsmen who have converted the half-finished mats into fine quality bed mats wrangle over the price with the traders. The price is fixed. The deal is settled. The traders distribute the Tarawa mats for sale through retail outlets. The raw material for these mats comes from the leaves of the screw pine plant. These plants belong to the species Pandanus odoratissimus that are abundant in marshy lands and adjoining areas. The plants have elongated tapering leaves with spines on the blades and on the dorsal side of the midrib. Being of economic value, these plants in Tarawa are grown all along the road to demarcate the boundaries and to serve as fences. Even today, instead of building compounds, landowners here plant screw pine saplings along their land holdings. Besides serving as a fence, these plants provide the raw material for the mat-making craft of Tarawa. It is the women folk who undertake the job of collecting the screw pine leaves. The leaves are processed to obtain thin strands that are the basic element in the finished mats. First, the spines have to be removed. And the craftswomen have a simple way of removing the spines from the leaves. A small knot is made of coconut husk fiber. The knot, held between the index finger and the thumb, is run along the blade and the midrib to free the leaf from the spine. The spine-free leaves are spliced into strands of the desired thickness. The strands are then boiled in water to give them enough strength. These strands are then kept immersed in water, preferably running water, for a day. Upon drying, these strands have attained a lustrous grey color and the required tensile strength. Now begins the job of the weaving of these strands. The first set of strands are folded and locked at one end. The vertical strands serve as the warp and the horizontal, the weft. The interweaving of the warp and the weft go to make the mat. In between the domestic chores, the women of Tarawa keep themselves engaged in making these mats. It takes a day or two to complete one mat, which fetches them about 30 rupees each, a meager return for the day's job. Once the weaving is complete, the unfinished pieces are handed over to other craftsmen who carry out the finishing job. A bed mat is made up of two mat pieces kept one above the other so as to give a cushion effect. The pieces are measured and cut into appropriate sizes. The edges are trimmed and tied together to prevent them from slipping. The colored screw-pine strands that are used to stitch the edges give the mats a pleasing appearance. The loose and unwanted strands are trimmed to give a smooth finish to the surface of the mat. These mats, though of good quality, are not in demand now, as mats made of synthetic fiber have flooded the market. This has made mat making an unattractive craft.
ഒരു 45 വർഷം കൊണ്ട് ഈ കൂലിപ്പണിയാ ഒന്നും കിട്ടാനൊന്നുമില്ല. ഇതിലെ ഇടനിലക്കാരാ ഇതിന് കാശൊക്കെ അടിക്കുന്നത്. ഞങ്ങൾക്കൊന്നുമില്ല. ഒരു 30 രൂപ ദിവസം കഷ്ടിച്ചേ കിട്ടത്തുള്ളൂ. ഇവിടെ 4 പേരുണ്ട്. 4 പേരും കൊണ്ട് ഇത് ചെയ്താലേ ഈ തുക കിട്ടത്തുള്ളൂ. അങ്ങനെ അരാജകമാ വളരെ.
As bed mats are no longer a profitable product, local entrepreneurs have diversified the product range. The mats are now being converted into a variety of useful products and other curio items. In diversification of the product, the first thing they did was to color the strands in various hues. The colored fibers are hand-woven in small mat pieces by the traditional craftswomen. This has ensured a small yet steady income to many a craftswoman like Bhavani.
10-20 വർഷമായി പണിയിട്ട് തുടങ്ങിയിട്ട് മെത്തപ്പ. അതിനിപ്പോൾ വിലയൊന്നും ഇല്ലാത്തതുകൊണ്ട് തുണ്ടുവരെ എടുത്തുകൊണ്ട് വന്ന് ചെയ്യാൻ. ഇപ്പോൾ ഇതാ 2 തുണ്ട് കൊണ്ടുപോയാൽ 10-15 രൂപ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ 20 ആട്ടെ. ഇതേ ഉള്ളു. അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ അങ്ങ് കഴിയുന്നു.
It is a mats woven by the craftswomen that are shaped into value-added products at the cottage industrial units run by private entrepreneurs. The products of these units range from useful articles such as table mats, vanity bags, office files, boxes, and a variety of knickknacks. One important aspect of these value-added products is the use of only eco-friendly materials. Synthetic materials are shunned. This has enhanced the market for these products. Women are trained in this new craft by societies registered under the Khadi and Village Industries Department of the Kerala government. Over 100 such trained women are employed in these units. These units have given, as many believe, hope for survival.
താനെയ്ത്തായിരുന്നു എനിക്ക് ആദ്യമായിട്ട്. അങ്ങനെ അതിൽ നിന്നും അവിടെ വിപണനം കുറവായപ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനെ തുണ്ടുപാ നെയ്ത് ബാഗുകളും ടേബിൾ മാറ്റ്, മറ്റ് തൊപ്പി, കുഷ്യൻ കവറ് അങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഓരോ ഉൽപ്പന്നങ്ങൾ ഇവിടെ നിർമ്മിക്കാൻ ഭാവിച്ചു. അങ്ങനെ ഇവിടെ വന്ന് ഞങ്ങൾ ഇവിടെ ജോലി ചെയ്ത് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് നല്ല വരുമാനമുണ്ട്.
Who could resist the attraction of these cute and colorful products? An offshoot of the Tarawa mat industry. These products, without much help from the state agencies, have begun to reach selected foreign markets.
ഞങ്ങൾ സാധാരണയായിട്ട് ഉൽപ്പാദിപ്പിക്കുന്ന സാധനങ്ങൾ ലേഡീസ് ബാഗ്, ഷൂസ്, ഹാറ്റ്, പ്രിഞ്ചസ് ബാഗുകൾ, പലതരത്തിലുള്ള സാധനങ്ങൾ ഉൽപ്പാദിപ്പിക്കാറുണ്ട്. ഇവ അന്യനാടുകളിലേക്കാണ് പോകുന്നത്. USA, ഫ്രാൻസ്, ജർമ്മനി ഈ സ്ഥലങ്ങളിലേക്കാണ്. പക്ഷേ ഇത് ഇടത്തട്ടുകാരാണ് ഇതിൻ്റെ ലാഭം മിക്കവാറും കൊണ്ടുപോകാറുള്ളത്. ഇതിന് വേണ്ട പ്രോത്സാഹനങ്ങൾ ഗവൺമെന്റിൽ നിന്ന് കിട്ടാറില്ല.
Certainly, a little encouragement to the local enterprise, and of course, a clear policy on the popularization of eco-friendly products would go a long way in saving this traditional mat-making craft and thus bettering the lives of the craftsmen.
Welcome to the session of Organization of Knowledge in Libraries, Library Classification. In this session, we shall discuss canons for works in the verbal plane and notational plane. Canons of verbal plane. Verbal plane is a plane of words or terms. The classes and isolates derived in the idea plane need to be denoted with appropriate terms, words or phrases in the classification schemes. However, the terms used to name the classes have many limitations. Some of them may be homonyms and synonyms. Certain terms become obsolete and new terms take their places. Polite terms are to be used to avoid the offense of users. All these problems relating to the natural language have to be eliminated or minimized in a scheme for classification. S.R. Ranganathan enunciated 4 canons to solve the problem relating to terminology. They are 1. Canon of context, 2. Canon of enumeration, 3. Canon of currency, 4. Canon of reticence. Now let us look into canon of context. The canon states that the denotation of a term in a scheme for classification should be determined in the light of the different classes or ranked isolates of lower order, that is upper links, belonging to the same primary chain of the classes or ranked isolate denoted by the term in question. There are certain terms that can occur in more than one subject. For example, terms such as disease, physiology, ecology, design, prevention can occur in different subjects. Therefore, in deciding the class number of a book, one should keep in mind the context in which a term has been used. This canon directs that the context can be understood by looking at the upper terms or broader subjects under which a particular term in question is enumerated as a subordinate class or isolate. The canon further indicates that the classificationist need not repeat any or all the upper links along with a lower link in the designing of a classification scheme. Column classification CC and duodecimal classification DDC follow the direction of this canon. For example, in CC edition 6 we have C5 radiation, 4 C in personality, 1 light, 1 2 red, 1 3 orange, etc. Here red and orange means red light and orange light, but the word light is not repeated as it is given in the upper link. Next is canon of enumeration. This canon states that the denotation of a term in a scheme for classification should be determined in the light of the subclasses or lower links enumerated in the various chains having the class denoted by the term in question as their common link. The denotation of a term may vary from one classification scheme to another. Usually, it is not possible to achieve an agreement regarding the denotation of terms. Hence, a user of a scheme should determine the denotation of a given term in a scheme with reference to the subclasses enumerated under it. The user should apply the canon of enumeration to determine the denotation of the term. For example, political science in CC includes only the theory of political science, but political science in DDC includes political science in practice also in addition to the theoretical aspects. This difference is understood from the enumeration of the subclasses of political science in the two schemes. Next is canon of currency. Canon of currency states that the term used to denote a class or ranked isolate in a scheme for classification should be the one current among those specializing in the subject field covered. According to this canon, the terms used in a scheme for classification should be the one in current usage. Usually, terms used to denote classes become obsolete through the passage of time and new terms emerge. A classification scheme should be revised constantly to accommodate new subjects and new terms. A faceted classification scheme does not enumerate compound subjects as such. Instead, it will enumerate fundamental constituent terms of compound subjects. But an enumerative classification scheme will enumerate simple and compound subjects. Names of compound subjects become obsolete more frequently compared to the names of constituent terms. Therefore, an enumerative classification scheme requires more frequent revision than a faceted scheme. Next is canon of reticence. This canon states that the terms used to denote a class or a ranked isolate in a scheme for classification should not be critical, that is, expressing any opinion of the classificationist. For example, the use of the term minor authors in the earlier editions of DDC was a violation of this canon. Similarly, the use of the term criticism in CC 6th edition is also a violation of the canon. The term criticism evokes prejudice. CC 7th edition has replaced this term by evaluation, which is a more polite expression. Works in notational plane. Need for notation, qualities of notation. The work in the notational plane involves representing the divisions of universe of knowledge with ordinal numbers from a system of notations. In a library classification scheme, names of classes or subjects are to be denoted by digits having ordinal value. Now, need for notation. Alphabetical sequence of names of subjects resulting in the scattering of documents of related subjects. existence of synonyms and homonyms and other inconsistencies in the verbal plane rule out a purely alphabetical arrangement of subjects in a library classification scheme. Notational representation helps to achieve a filiatory sequence of the classes. It also helps to achieve mechanization in shelf arrangement of documents. Now, definitions of notation. Notation is a set of symbols representing numbers, quantities, sounds, etc. Notation is used in our everyday life for various contexts such as in music, mathematics or chemistry. In library classification also we use notation. E.C. Richardson defines notation as a shorthand sign. According to H.E. Bliss, notation is a symbol of marks or symbols in some order denoting terms or members of a series or system of things. Richardson's definition is general in nature, whereas Bliss's definition is more specific and with reference to library classification. However, S.R. Ranganathan gave a more precise definition. According to him, notation is a number forming a member of a notational system. Further, he explains that the notational system is a system of ordinal numbers to represent the classes in a scheme for classification. Now, the qualities of notation. S.R. Ranganathan mentions the qualities for notation in his Prolegomena to Library Classification, 3rd edition. First one is brevity. Second, speed in writing, that is, simplicity of symbols is required to achieve this quality. Third is pronounceability. Fourth is block formation. Fifth is facet formation. Sayer's Manual of Classification, 5th edition, enumerates the following as the features of a good notation. First one is brevity. Notation should be as brief as possible. Second, simplicity. Notation should be easy to say, to read and to pronounce. Third is expressiveness. Notation must convey clearly the order of subjects in the scheme for classification. Fourth is revealing the hierarchy. Notation should reveal the hierarchy of the system, indicating by its length and structure which subjects are equal in rank or to which subjects a specific topic has been subordinated. Fifth is hospitality. Notation should be hospitable, which means that the notation should permit any new subject to be inserted at the most appropriate place in the existing scheme so that helpful order is preserved. Sixth one, mnemonics. Mnemonics refers to the art of assisting memory. Notation must have special mnemonic aids to promote and assist the librarian's ability to recollect class numbers. It also helps in providing class numbers for new topics with consistency. Seventh is facetization. Notation should reveal each change of facet and indicate relations among faces. There are 4 factors which help to determine the brevity or otherwise of a notation. First is the amount of details provided. Sometimes one has to make a choice between brevity and specificity. Second, the allocation or apportionment of notation to subjects. Some subject fields in certain classification schemes have been allocated only a very small range of notation. Documents dealing with such subjects will get a longer class number. For example, in DDC, Christianity is given a lion's share of the class numbers under main class religion. All other religions are squeezed in under 290 other religions. Therefore, a book on some aspects of Hinduism or Islam will have a longer class number. Same is the case with non-European languages and their literature. Third one, notation can be shorter if it gives up the idea of consistently displaying the structure or hierarchy. Fourth one, an alphabetical notation tends to be shorter than a numerical one. A notation of decimal numbers offers 9 coordinate positions only, but an alphabetical base provides for 26 coordinate topics. A mixed notation consisting of both alphabets and numerals has much higher capacity to accommodate more coordinate classes. Therefore, decimal numbers used hierarchically offer longer class numbers. Simplicity and brevity need not go together. A short class number need not be simple if it consists of very complicated symbols. Pure notation consists of Indo-Arabic numerals, IAN, only is considered to be most simple. However, simple and brief notation may not be sufficient to represent the divisions of the ever-growing universe of knowledge coextensively. S.R. Ranganathan insisted that the class number should be coextensive with the specific subject of the document. Expressiveness and revealing hierarchy more or less imply the same quality. In expressive or hierarchical notation, the length of the class numbers increase in proportion to the order of the class or in proportion to the number of characteristics used. It becomes easy to understand which subjects are coordinate and to which subject a particular topic is subordinated. This kind of notation is also known as structured notation. Hierarchical notation has many advantages. It helps to derive subject headings using chain procedure. It also helps to broaden or narrow down search in manual as well as mechanical information retrieval. However, hierarchical notation may not be always possible because it may increase the length of class numbers. Therefore, hierarchy and expressiveness shall be adopted within reasonable limits. Hospitality refers to the ability of the notational system to accommodate new topics and concepts at the appropriate places. Without hospitality in notation, maintenance of helpful order among the classes is impossible. Classification schemes facilitate hospitality by using a number of notational techniques and devices. Mnemonic quality refers to memory aids provided to notation by the consistent use of same digits for same concepts wherever they occur. Separately enumerated schedules and tables serve as memory aids. Similarly, seminally equivalent concepts are represented by same digit wherever they occur. Use of mnemonics reduces the bulk of the schedule of the classification scheme and gives consistency to the class numbers and provides a helpful method for constructing class numbers for newly emerging topics. In block formation, long class numbers are separated into blocks of 3 digits as a requisite of the physiology of human eye and psychology of human mind. In facet formation, different groups of digits are separated by meaningful connecting digits to indicate the nature of each facet in a class number. A mixed notation is to be preferred over a pure notation because of its long base. All the mentioned qualities are desirable for a good notational system. However, it is the particular situation which decides the type of notation. It is only reasonable to strike a balance between the different qualities mentioned. Next is canons for notational plane, notational synonym and homonym. According to S.R. Ranganathan, the notational system used in a scheme for classification should satisfy certain basic canons for notation and the canons of mnemonics. The basic canons for notation are grouped into two sets. First one is canons relating to notational synonym and homonym. Second is 5 antithetic pairs of canons. The first group includes two canons, namely canon of synonym and canon of homonym. The second set consists of 5 pairs of canons, which are such that the first pair in each pair is a positive statement and the second one is its negation. Therefore, the first one should be preferred in each pair of canons. The 5 pairs are: first one, canon of relativity and canon of uniformity; second, canon of hierarchy and canon of non-hierarchy; third, canon of mixed base and canon of pure base; fourth, canon of faceted notation and canon of non-faceted notation; fifth one, canon of co-extensiveness and canon of under-extensiveness. Next is canons relating to notational synonym and homonym. First one, canon of synonym. Canon of synonym states the class number of a subject in a system of class numbers and the isolate number of an isolate idea in a system of isolate numbers should be unique. This canon implies that each subject should be represented by one and only one class number. Use of two numbers to represent one idea or giving alternative class numbers for the same subject should be avoided. For example, DDC gives alternative numbers for some subjects such as biography and bibliography. Biography of scientists 509.2.925, bibliography of astronomy 520.16.016.52. Similarly, in CC, psychotherapy gets two numbers, L:4:691, S:86. The classifier should choose only one of the two alternatives for a subject and follow that consistently if the scheme violates the canon at any instance. Otherwise, it will create confusion to the classifier as well as to the user. It is essential that the classificatory language should be free from synonyms. Next is canon of homonym. The subject represented by a class number in a system of class numbers and the isolate idea represented by an isolate number in a system of isolate numbers should be unique. The canon implies that each class number should represent one and only one subject. No class number should be allowed to represent two or more subjects. Similarly, each isolate number should represent one and only one isolate idea. When a classification scheme follows brevity in its notation, it is not possible to adhere strictly to this canon. For example, Ryder's International Classification consists of 3-digit class numbers only, and each class number represents several subjects, thus violating the canon. A faceted classification scheme has greater ability to resolve notational homonym. However, in practice, CC edition 6 also does not have specific class numbers for many subordinate topics in some main classes. For example, in main class library science, all aspects of library cataloging such as subject cataloging, descriptive cataloging are to be included in one class number 2:55. canon of homonym demands detailed enumeration and specific class number for each specific subject. Classification schemes have to provide for this by constant revision and detailed enumeration. Now let us summarize whatever we have discussed. As we have already seen, this part describes the normative principles needed for works in the verbal plane and notational plane. 4 canons of verbal plane, namely canon of context, canon of enumeration, canon of currency and canon of reticence are described in detail. Further, the term notation is defined in the context of library classification. Need for notation in classification and the essential qualities required for a good notational system are also explained. Finally, 2 important canons for notational plane, that is canon of synonym and canon of homonym, are stated and explained. Now I have a few assignments for you to work out. First one, state and explain the canon of context. Second, write a short note on canon of synonym. Third, mention the different qualities of notation and examine how far the notational system of colon classification satisfies these qualities. Fourth, critically examine how far colon classification and Dewey Decimal classification observe the canon of harmony. Now here are a few books for reference. Theory of Classification, 4th edition revised, written by Krishna Kumar, published by Vikas Publishing House, New Delhi, 1988. Next is Library Classification, Facets and Analysis, written by Shahabat Hussain, published by Tata McGraw-Hill, New Delhi, 1993. Prolegomena to Library Classification, 3rd edition, written by S.R. Ranganathan, published by Sharda Ranganathan Endowment for Library Science, Bangalore, 1967. And finally, Bachelor of Library Information Science, Study Material, University of Calicut, 1995. Thank you for watching this session. See you in the next session. Until then, bye.
Welcome to the interface. Today in interface we have our honorable guest Dr. Kapote Noy. Dr. Kapote Noy is Deputy Division Head, Nuclear Data Section, International Atomic Energy Agency, Vienna. Being the representative of IAEA and the Deputy Division Head of Nuclear Data Section, can you elaborate what are the activities of Nuclear Data Section?
Well, first of all, I would like to appreciate the invitation to come to the University of Calicut on behalf of the IEA and of my own name. It's a pleasure to be here to teach the students of the university about the activities of the IEA, in particular the activities of the Nuclear Data Section. So we have been, the main goals of the activities of the Nuclear Data Sections are 3 points. We are working on data dissemination. This is through the maintenance of the web page. We are also coordinating international projects with member states, so with experts from all member states, in order to produce data. And then finally, we are contributing also through our own technical work of our staff to make the data producing those projects better. So I think this is a good summary of our activities.
So what is this nuclear reaction course mean?
Well, of course, this is part of the production of nuclear data. We need to use we have experimental data on one side, and experimental data clearly you have installation, but then on the other side you have modeling, and for modeling this is where you play the role the nuclear reaction codes. And in particular, what we have been doing during the workshop organized at the universities to try to teach students how to use those nuclear reaction codes.
And what are the various types of nuclear reaction codes available from the nuclear data section?
I mean, at the nuclear data section, we have focused on nuclear reaction code system Emmrc, which is freely available. It's an open source code. And this is the main task. We all, of course, have collaboration with other data centers and with other people who produce his own codes. So we try to disseminate and distribute Emmrc as an example of what the nuclear reaction code can be, but it's not the only exclusive. It's not the code. There are many other possible ways of doing things. And we really, I think what is important is that people learn how to access the data, how to get the right data, how to compare experimental data with calculations. So this is the main goal of the nuclear reaction codes.
And what are the various types of other nuclear reaction codes apart from this Emmrc?
Right now there are many reaction codes let's say, in the market available for different applications. The advantage of both, I will say that probably one of the most known part of Emmrc is Tali's code from Dr. Arjan Koning and Dimitri Hochman and collaborators, and is similar capabilities. I think that it's good to have some different codes, so you can compare results from different codes. But the important thing, these are very complex systems, so you can imagine that the development of such reaction model reaction code system takes more than 10 years. So in any case, when we are talking about the system, it's because it's really not one single code. It's the whole capabilities, including plotting, graphical user interface, comparison with experimental data. And this is, I think, what is the important point to stress. It's not something that you really sit down and do one simple programming. It's a whole environment and complex system.
Actually, a nuclear reaction code is supposed to explain the nuclear reaction model, in which the real physics will be explained. Then basically the physics will be unique thing. Then why do there is different types of codes?
Well, there are different type of codes because even if the physics is the same, there are different ways of implementing the physics. So, of course, the way that on one side you have the physics, at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is the word model. That's the key word. Model is an approximation to the physical reality. But actually, there is not unique way of approximating the physical reality. So you may have as many models as people are working on a given problem. And in a way, the fact that we have different models is reflected in the fact that we have different reaction codes. That's, I think, is the best way of saying what you expect to have difference between them.
So, can this Emmrc code can unify the various concepts of nuclear physics behind this? How far it will be helpful?
We try to be comprehensive for a particular given problem. I will say that what we are doing, we are trying to calculate, to use reaction models that are applicable to produce nuclear data for fast incident particles. And that means this data could be useful for many different applications. That mentioned some of them is just energy applications, nuclear reactors, but the data are also very useful for other applications, what we call non-energy applications, that range from astrophysics to things like medical applications. How you can calculate what is the possible yield of the medical radioisotope using a nuclear reactions. And this broad definition means that the code could be used for many different things. And this is valid not only for Emmrc, it is valid for any other of the other reaction codes.
So, nuclear reaction code Emmrc is an open source code you are mentioning. So, what do you mean by open source code?
Well, this is quite. I think open source codes started with Linux, and the idea is simple. The idea is that everybody can contribute. And actually, one of the key points that we try to come to the member states countries of the IEA and to teach students how to use the code and to teach staff is that the fact that if they are interested in applying the code for any particular problem, they are open to contact us, they are open to make a proposal, to do some coding, and we can integrate later. And the source code is available. So at the end of the day, this is something that is for the benefit of all member states of the IEA. And this is quite important concept, because it's not the problem when somebody is developing a code and you are limited to one particular place, to one particular lab, to one particular country. We really, by definition, the IEA, whatever we produce is available for everybody. And this is quite important to keep the concept of open source code, so everybody can contribute. And it's really, from the very beginning, the code has been an international collaboration, and this is the way that we want to keep it.
So, in this case, what are the types of collaboration or contribution do you expect from students and young scholars?
Well, actually, this is a good question. It depends on what they are doing. Ideally, let's say if there are people working in some specific physics where the code could be applicable for a nuclear reaction, let's say you are doing heavy ions, then maybe Emmrc is not especially good for heavy ions because there have not been people specializing in heavy ions collaborating with us. This is an opportunity for students to make a contribution to the whole system. But they are getting a lot from what is already available, but they can also contribute, and their contribution is quite important. So we are looking forward meeting people who can contribute to the code and who can use the code also in their own work. Because at the end of the day, the first reason why we developed the system was to use in our own work and to try to stimulate people using it through the open source mechanism to make more wider spread of the calculated data and the reactions that is there.
Can you explain what are the contributions from Indian side towards this nucleation code in general, and nuclear reaction theory, and particularly this nuclear reaction code Emmrc?
Well, I think in India it has been a long tradition of nuclear physics. So, for example, they have been scientists here contributing to the project on not only on the nuclear physics side, but also to the input data we have been using in the project. And India was one of the collaborating partners of the RIPPLE project. So I think this is important, and we are really looking forward that collaboration continues. So right now I think that in India, this is one of the countries where is more widespread the use of Emmrc. And this has a direct impact of the fact that we have been coming here, we have been trying to train people, and I do see, I mean, I have been coming to India already for 6 years now, and I do see the real impact. There are some people who are getting much better, they are getting trained, and this is just a chain reaction. So you first start getting 2 people, those 2 people train 4 people, and then at some point you really have a whole community using it. And this is for everybody's benefit. So I think that the contribution of any given country, and India is not an exception, is quite important in this task.
So can you briefly explain what are the importance of this nuclear reaction data in nuclear safety, which is a matter of concern for public?
Well, nuclear data underlies everything. So it's not only safety is one of the aspects, but nuclear data is important when you are going to the hospital and you are doing radiotherapy. Nuclear data are important when you have a nuclear power plant, and it's quite important for the operation of the power plant. It's quite important for the safety, because indeed, for example, you need to know how long you can operate the nuclear power plant. And at the end of the day, that depends on the underlying data you have. That determines, among other things, the safety of your reactor vessel, how long you can operate the plant. But this is one part. There are many other things for the safety of the plants, and the IEA has a special department dealing with nuclear safety. So there are many other regulations. But of course, we are doing our small part to make sure that at least the data that is being used in any applications, and nuclear energy is just one of them. It's also important in medical applications, in other applications. Should be the highest quality data. And if you are using the highest quality data, you are setting the first stone for the whole building of nuclear applications. And that's, I think, the important goal.
Can you briefly explain what the procedure for getting the required nuclear data from the NDS site?
Well, we have a website which is accessible from the whole world, but in particular, India is one of the member states where there is what we call a mirror site. A mirror site is just reflection, literally, is a copy of our website in Vienna at the IEA here locally. And that's really greatly improved the access of the local people to this data, because you don't have to connect to Vienna. You have exactly the same data available locally. So that's improved the availability. But in general, our website contains all the information about all the projects, and our section just happened to have the anniversary, the 50th anniversary. So the section started the work 50 years back. We can say that in our website you have data for the last 50 or 60 years of nuclear physics. And it contains the most comprehensive source of information on nuclear data that includes experimental data, evaluated data, and all related data that you may need for different applications.
Can you explain what is the experimental data and what is the evaluated data?
Yes, this is an important distinction, because people, when experimental data is clear, when you do experiments, that's what we call experimental data. So it's a direct result of doing some experiments to measure something. But it's also obvious that, unfortunately, we don't have neither the possibilities, sometimes physical, because you don't have the technical capabilities to measure something. Sometimes you don't have the targets. Sometimes there are other problems. Sometimes you even don't have the resources to make the measurements. They could be expensive. So there is a real need to complement the measured data with something else. And that something else is that you use the models, and then when you combine models with data, this is the point when you produce something that we call evaluated data. And evaluated data, in the nutshell, is the best possible data available for any given application that considers the status of the current knowledge. And current knowledge means both models and experiment.
So what are the procedures of evaluation process?
Well, the best definition is that combination of experiments with model data. There could be some cases where the experimental data are really comprehensive, and therefore you may not need models. But very often experimental data are not comprehensive. They don't cover all energies, they don't cover all isotopes, and in that case you really need to combine models that they are not that precise. Experiments are much more precise, but the models always provide comprehensive information. And therefore, the best combination of them, properly weighted, this is when you produce evaluated data.
So what are various types of standards you are implementing in nuclear reaction measurements?
Yeah, this is an important normative function of the data we are producing. So it's the fact that on one side, standards is considered to be the highest reference data that can be used in order to make measurements. And I have to say here that when you are measuring something, very often what you do is that you do relative measurements. Relative means relative to something. So you know you have a ruler, and when you are using a ruler, somebody calibrated that ruler. So you don't care about what is the absolute calibration. You really use the ruler to measure some distance. But this is a relative measurement. You are relying on somebody else who produced that ruler. Well, in nuclear reactions it's the same. Somebody measured the cross-sections, and if there is a high-quality work, you may combine many of those high-quality measurements, and you produce what is called a standard. And then these standards can be used in relative measurements. So in any lab, anywhere in the world, they are doing this relative measure of cross-sections. They use the standards they are produced at the IEA. And of course, the standards are produced through international collaboration. We are just coordinating the efforts of producing in particular a standard for neutron-induced reactions. This is one part of the work. Additionally, we may mention also that there are what we call monitor reactions, and this is important for charged particle-induced reactions. This is very much used for production of medical isotopes. So in this case, you are using accelerators, and if you are using accelerators, then you need again reference reactions. These reference reactions that are the best known cross-sections, this is what we call monitor reactions. And there are several of them, and this combination, if you are using those data, this is our best knowledge from the experimental point of view for those reactions. But it's quite important to make sure that you keep unique reference to those data or to those standards, because they are used everywhere in the world. You want people to use the same numbers. Otherwise, if you keep changing the numbers, then they are not anymore standards. So I think this is one of the functions that is quite important to have centralized internationally at the IEA nuclear data section.
And when you are using modeling, so there should be various parameters. So what are the typical parameters that one has to use for preparing a code or nuclear modeling?
Well, parameters, of course, is quite important to get a good agreement with data and for the use of the nuclear reaction model to a proper selection of what are the model parameters. It was an probably the longest running international project of the IEA nuclear data section was the recommended input parameter library, so-called RIPPLE. RIPPLE is precisely the library or the database that contains all input parameters that you need for model calculations. So this is the best recommended set of input parameters. And this project was running for more than 15 years. So it finished in 2009. All the data for input parameters are available in our website, but additionally, this data has been used as input for the reaction codes. In particular, both Emmrc and TALIS reaction codes, they fully include the input data provided by the RIPPLE project.
What are the input data, like you say, optical model or level density parameter, etc., etc.?
Well, this is everything is included into RIPPLE. So RIPPLE contains 6 big segments, and those segments goes from experimental masses. Then you get resonance information that you need in order to define your level densities. Then you get the level densities. You get the optical model. You get the gamma ray strength function. So essentially, you get all really the parameters that you need in order to make a reaction calculation, either for nucleons or for heavier incident particles, and in the typical energy range that goes from a few keV to hundreds of MeV.
So in optical model parameters, what are the information that you are providing? What do you mean by this?
I think that what is important in the optical model is that you are really comprehensive. So there have been so many optical models published in the literature, and let's say 20 years ago, if you were asked, somebody give you a paper and tells you, well, this is my optical model, is written in the paper, and then 2 persons try to use the same paper to reproduce what was written there, and they came up with different numbers. So I think the standardization of the input parameters and the standardization of the codes used for the optical model is quite important in order to reproduce the same cross-section and to have the quality agreement about the calculated data. So that's an important part of having on one side input parameters in a database like RIPPLE, and on the other side the capabilities to have system codes like Emmrc or TALIS that can use those parameters to make to calculate cross sections.
So this Emmrc code uses a unique optical model parameter, or various options are available for covering the wide range of energy and wide range of masses?
No, in Emmrc you can use any optical model which is compiled in RIPPLE. So actually there are many different optical models, and of course, you may see some of the models which what we call their global models. They can be applied for a wide range of energies and isotopes, but there are also some local, what we call local optical models, and this is probably the best fitted optical model parameter for a given nucleus. So the short answer to your question, it depends on the application. You have many different optical models, but depending on the type of data, the type of calculation you want to do, and the type of application you want to compare to, then you have to select, you should try to do the best selection of the optical model. There are some default selection in Emmrc about the optical model, in order that if you don't do anything, you are going to get some default values. But by no means those default values are optimum for any given case. But they work globally. So this is a difference that you should understand. You don't expect to get with default values the best possible calculation for any given case. But on the other side, the value is that you can get calculation for all the cases that you analyze. And then you study the difference between them.
What are the basic theoretical concepts that is involved in Emmrc code? Basic nuclear reaction theories, what are the associated theories?
Emmrc code, of course, is historically, it started actually from people doing some calculation for neutron-induced reactions. I think the experience that there is in Emmrc code for neutron-induced reactions is very large. Then it's becoming more and more important to deal properly with charged particle-induced reactions, in particular for things like medical applications, ion beam analysis, and other things. So we try to improve our capabilities to reproduce charged particle data. And we have some capabilities also to deal with heavy ion reactions, but they are quite limited at the time. But we see that is important, precisely the collaboration, because the developer team, well, we are always very busy people. So any help, and especially students who wants to engage into the project and to contribute to it, that's really welcome.
So this nuclear medicine as well as radiation therapy are some of the activities used for medical science. So how far this nuclear data is important in nuclear medicine and radiation therapy? Yeah,
well, nuclear data, they are really, I think, critical in many aspects of medical applications, and that includes things that goes from, when we think of nuclear data, there are not only reaction data, we have reaction data, we have decay data. So decay data includes things like half-life, and half-life is the physical quantity which is critical when you are talking about the medical application of radioisotopes. Because let's say you usually try to get isotopes that has short half-life to treat patients, because otherwise the patient goes away from the hospital and is still radioactive. So you don't want that type of thing. And all these safety aspects, or even how much radiation the patient get from a given isotope, depends on nuclear data, both on decay or on reaction data. So obviously nuclear data are quite important. Then additionally is becoming more and more important. Traditionally people in radiotherapy, they have been dealing with electrons and photons to treat patients. These days in most advanced centers, they are trying also heavy ion therapy. They are using carbon beams, and there the role of nuclear data again is more important, because directly, or you have proton beams. So directly we are talking about using proton beams, which are nuclear reactions, to treat patients. And therefore we do see that the role of nuclear data even in radiotherapy is growing. But even is more important if you want to predict what are the properties, how you can produce better radionuclides, because that's really a question that is fully answered by nuclear data. So how we can improve the quantity and quality of the radionuclides that we are producing, that depends somehow on the underlying nuclear data. So by improving the nuclear data, we are also improving the way that we produce radionuclides, and that has a direct implications on the use of those radionuclides in medicine.
So typically in radiotherapy, they use about 15 MeV and higher energies for therapy. So naturally it is expected to produce neutrons.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, that the neutrons are produced by photon-induced reactions. So you have photoneutron production. This is one of the reasons that very often these days people don't recommend to use high energy photon beams, that you should try to use beams with typically less than 6 MeV photon energy. And that means is precisely to try to limit the amount of neutrons produced in those cases. And the main reason behind is that the biological effect of neutrons is much higher than the biological effect of photons. So you want to avoid having neutrons contaminating your or irradiating your patient. But that's a good question. Again, photonuclear cross-section by definition is a nuclear reaction. So if you want to know, for a long time people who were dealing with radiotherapy, they were not considering neutrons because it was not part of the typical interaction mechanism of photon with the matter. So they were worried about the scattering of photons and scattering of electrons, but they were not considering the neutrons. And it's quite important. We know these days that the dose from the neutrons could be important, and we should try to take care to avoid the neutron production. Again, there you need nuclear data.
So this photoneutron cross-section is available in our NDS site?
Yeah, definitely. We have, actually we are going to start a new project to revisit the status of those cross-sections at the IEA, but we do have evaluated data and we have a compilation of experimental data available for photon-induced reactions. So the basic data that can be used for those studies is available. And we try to improve the consistency of those data. That's the reason we are going to start a new project.
Oh, nice. So in this aspect, what are the messages that you can convey to our students?
Well, I would like to thank again the university, but I think the most important thing that every student should keep in mind is that there is nothing replacing the hard work. So no matter how much you learn, how much you get trained, at the end of the day, even we are coming here, we can spend 1 week. And I think if you really have to use properly any of these reaction systems, and they are really complex, we have been developing them for many years. Well, you cannot replace that amount of time. You have to spend a significant amount of time, and I think the most important word there is commitment. So you really have to feel the passion for what you are doing. And if you feel the passion, then you can succeed. You can have success in whatever you are doing, and in particular in trying to use the system we have developed.
What is the future of nuclear physics research in India and in general in the world?
Well, we are looking forward. We think that nuclear physics is quite important part of the society as such. So I really hope, and we are looking forward for a bright future for nuclear physics. So it's quite important, and these days you have nuclear data everywhere.
So we have a nice interaction with you, sir, and thankful to you. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. It was my pleasure.